Hi guys, my name is Mimi. I am a recovered alcoholic, and I specifically say that because here around Middle Georgia, when we mean recovered, it means that you have gone through all 12 steps and you've had a genuine spiritual experience when it comes to the 12 steps as well. When it comes to sharing my story, they always tell me like talk about what it was like before, how you came in, and what it's like now. So just a really quick rundown is that I was born to a teen mom. Growing up, it was a very turbulent childhood. I was raised by my grandparents until I was 9 years old because my mom actually went to college and got two master's degree during that time. So because of that, we were not close. By the time I was 9 and we finally did live together. It was very chaotic as that bond was not facilitated, nor was it really something that I think that she herself could really articulate. And so, not really having that bond with her, it did unfortunately lead to a lot of emotional, mental, and at times physical abuse until I became an adult. And I was one of those kids. I was very anxious, very depressed, pretty much kept to myself, as well as being really sheltered. And by the time that I was 16, when I thought that life like couldn't be crappier, I ended up going through the symptoms of what I now know is like a chronic pain syndrome. And so by the time that I had hit 18, I had a lot of anger due to the past trauma that I experienced, both from my family as well as what I experienced being in and out of the hospital for a couple of years. So I didn't really have my first drink until I was 18. And my cousin, when I was going through a really bad breakup, was like, hey, like, you should come with me. Like, my roommate is the bartender. Like, let's go. Right. Like, I was 2 months out from being 18. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, let's go. And I remember drinking for the first time and just feeling like finally, like I was around like my people because I had also been looking for like a place like call my own and seeing how cool and also just envying my cousin. I wanted that atmosphere around me. And so I went out seeking it. And so from the time I was 18 to when I was 19, I was really chaotic, very angsty, and I would go on like bingers for several days and not come home. I don't think anybody really understood what was going on. I no longer lived with my mother and I had gone back to my grandparents at this point. And I think it was just like me just like maladjusting to adulthood. But in reality, I had like a lot of anger and unresolved trauma that I never really had been able to explain to anybody, as well as no solutions on how to deal with all those like really big emotions inside of me. And so as time went on, I had relationships with people, or I would try to control like the environment around me. I couldn't really do that. I thought that alcoholism or other substances was the way to go about that because in the first time I felt like finally, like this is what I can do. Like I get to make my own choices now. That wasn't really true. I was the kind of person I'd pee in your backyard. I was very chaotic as a human. I would fall down on like marble floors and they'd be like, Mimi, please, for love of God, please get up. I have, thank God, like the funny stories from that or the really reckless ones. But I'm very thankful that like I wasn't arrested and it turned out all right because God was watching me, to like the really sad ones where I was a detriment to the people around me. And the people that I called my friends, I was really mad because I was like, oh, like they're not treating me nicely. I wasn't treating them any better myself. And that was kind of like, I think the main indicator when like I was now doing these substances. I was drinking like my cousin was and like doing this, like, you know, what I felt like was a step-by-step plan to be cool like my cousin and still not getting that camaraderie around me and feeling even more lonely than I had before when I was growing up. It was like this for several years. Because my stories does involve some other substances, I'm just going to kind of like skip forward and past that and say like because of certain situations that happen with those as well as my alcoholism, one of the reasons why I came into the room was not necessarily the basement that I had finally reached, but during the pandemic, so 2020, I had finally reached a point in my own mental health where I was severely depressed. I was going to school, but not knowing what I was really wanting to do with myself. I felt like I really couldn't imagine what the future was going to look like other than a day ahead of me. And I was stuck at a job that my boss was like, hey, you know, you could do this job forever and I would love you to be here. And I was like, fuck no. No, thank you. Like, I did not want that for myself. But I didn't really have a genuine answer on how to get out of it. And I remember like laying in bed really depressed, suffering from suicidal ideation. And like I was watching like the Queen's Gambit, and she's an alcoholic at a point in the season. I remember being like, damn, like that's really sad, as I'm like nursing like my own drink, and also just coming to the realization of, okay, that's slowly but surely like becoming me. And I looked at the sky and I was just like, please, for the love of God, like there has to be something more to this. There's a life worth living out there. And I finally picked up the phone. I went on Google and I was looking for treatment centers. I didn't know how to go about that. I knew there wasn't really anybody I could talk to about that, nor did I have any friends that I could really go to support. So it was honestly by God's grace that the thing that came up to me was that for the first time was the facility that I would end up going to, which would lead to my sobriety date being October 25th of 2020. When I went into treatment, I was so nervous. I was really scared because I remember just feeling like, oh God, like I'm around like all these different people. And I hadn't really been around people much at that point, especially being pandemic, but also just because I was like, okay, like what if I'm like really weird, and worrying about like that fitting in part, but also like I knew that I had a lot of hard work ahead of me. And over the phone, when they had talked to me, they were like, hey, like I think that you're suffering from more than mental illness. It sounds like, we may be suffering some substance use issues. And I said, no, that's not true. I just turned 21. That can't be a thing. But going through that treatment made me recognize and realize my behaviors. It was like having the door slammed in my face of like, yeah, you can't really do this anymore. And so when I was first introduced to AA was through treatment. I knew that it was available. I always thought of it this thing that was meant for like old white men. It's not really portrayed well in media. And so when they were like, okay, now you're going to start doing this, I was like, fuck, because like my grandmother's an alcoholic. Like I can't be an alcoholic. And it's like, this is really meant for me either. And so when I first went in, the way that they had it because of the pandemic was we would sit in a room as a group like 3 times a week, and we would watch a Zoom room, and they would talk to each other, but we couldn't talk to them and we couldn't talk to each other. We just had to sit in silence for a whole hour doing that Zoom meeting. And I was like, holy shit, like these people are in our cult and they need a therapist. They're saying things that I couldn't understand, because to be quite fair with you, that group in particular really felt more like a process group, which when you're doing that, what feels like a full-time job, a length amount of time, it wasn't really appreciated, nor was it really explained to me like the importance of like the book. I don't think I really got into like book work or even knew like that being a really important part of AA until I was about like 3 or 4 months sober. And so I remember talking to another peer at the treatment center about this, and they're like, I'm in AA. One of our peers is actually going to pick up like their 9-month chip. Would you be on there tonight? And I was like, dude, like I've already had a bunch of bad experiences with AA. Like I'm kind of over this. And they're like, no, like, come on. Right. And so I'm like, okay, fine. So I go on to this meeting, and for the first time, I'm like, hey, this isn't bad. These people are talking about a solution. These people are like, actually, they're giving me something that I have been genuinely looking for, which is like, how do we deal with these problems, as well as like the sense of like community. I remember, even though at the time I didn't really want to identify as an alcoholic at the time, like they were like, hey, like, do you have a question or do you want to speak? They allowed me to have that space there. And I had offhandedly had just mentioned, I was sharing like I'm about 3 months sober, and they were like, oh my God, like you're 90 days sober, that's perfect, like you should get a chip for that. And I was like, no, like I haven't really done this before, like it's really weird. And it's like, no. And one of the chips that I do have is actually one of the first chips that I ever got. My peer had sent me in the mail while I was at treatment, like my first chip. And it was like all sparkly and like with yellow and blue glitter. And getting that chip in the mail for me was, maybe there is a place for me, and maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. And so getting out of treatment, I was about 100 days sober at that point. And having gone to that meeting, when I got back home, I felt like a fish out of water. I didn't have any support. While they had kind of laid down that foundation, now it was time for me to do all this hard work that I didn't have real life practice in doing. And so I asked my friend about that meeting. And so That meeting ran every day of the week at 8 p.m. And so I did for 90 days straight after that, go to that meeting every night. At first, I was still kind of like apprehensive. They didn't force me to speak or anything like that, but they're just like, keep coming back. They weren't bothered by my presence. In fact, that they really welcomed my questions too. And I was like, okay, like maybe this isn't so bad. I mean, even when my friend had outed the fact that about like 4 months sober, I really hadn't gotten a sponsor, they said like, hey, like, you know what, if you don't want to sponsor right now, okay. You know, when you want someone to sponsor you, we're here when you're ready. And about another week or two, I was finally like, hey, like kind of interested in like this step work thing. I think it'd be really helpful now that, you know, I'm here, because I was really struggling with being in the same environment that I had done all these things in. In fact, when I got back home, I still had all the same liquor bottles in my refrigerator that I had before I left. And be happy to know I never touched a drop of any of them. Once I got my first sponsor, I really worked hard in going through the steps. I was really curious and trying to understand like the ideas or the mythology of it. While having a God concept wasn't necessarily the hard part of it, was really difficult for me was that first part of admitting that I was powerless, because I never felt like I had a bunch of power in the first place. But the thing that made make sense to me was that I don't have control over alcohol. And I had spent so long trying to control things in my life, and I finally had to realize like I can't control my behavior with it. I try to control things and I do really bad at that. And so I was able to conceptualize the first step to begin that journey. And where I sit today, I'm about 21 months sober. I have worked vigorously with Gicky Paw. I think I was about, this is last year around my birthday. So I want to say that I was probably like either a year sober or nearing a year sober by the time, like, I think Jessica or a friend of ours had mentioned it to me. I had just started getting into the fellowship here in my area. So I moved from being on Zoom to like finally going out and like meeting the people around me, which is scary. But I had learned to just like say yes to things, like just go, because like there was nothing for me to lose. Like I didn't have anything to give. So all I could do was just receive. And when I remember going to the rooms there, and Jessica was there and she was really welcoming. And I was just like, this is really cool. Like, this is something like for young people. I had never really heard of Gicky Paw, you know, and like she had brought that up. And I was like, I would love to be a part of this. One of the things I wanted to do was service and working with other alcoholics and really build that fellowship and network around me. And I think it was a pretty good way of like just breaking open that shell. I have no idea really what it was like that first day, I guess. Because anytime I try to remember like how I got there to like that interest meeting, I don't remember. But somehow, some way I did end up becoming the co-chair. And by doing that, I was about a year when I finally finished my step work, and then really getting into Gicky Paw stuff. It has completely transformed my spiritual program as I know it, because those character defects that I really suffered from were from like that need of control, like that need to want to micromanage things around me. And obviously when you're working with a group of people, like you can't do that. I got to also learn tolerance and strengths from the people around me as well. Earlier today, I was going through the big book, and on page 152, it says, "How is that to come about, you ask? Where am I to find these people? You're going to meet these new friends in your own community. Near you, alcoholics are dying helplessly like people in a sinking ship. If you live in a huge place, there are hundreds, high and low, rich and poor. These are future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You'll be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will escape disaster together. You will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself." I share that because escaping disaster together, walking through this program together, like I said, I've known her since I was basically a year sober, and my anniversary is going to be in October. I have gained not only a friend within this program, I've gained a sister. Today I was going through like some of my more legal stuff of like, okay, so who are you going to put down as like this person? I remember thinking like, oh yeah, like I could totally choose Jessica or another friend of the program for this, because like genuinely speaking, when it comes to, you know, my own family, we are not close. I don't speak to my mom today. And so, because of that, like I really do look at the people in the program as my family that I've been able to build and find people who are just as unique as me. There's something about being able to go into a meeting and a room full of other alcoholics and know, like, hey, like that person like shares a similar story as me. Or when I say something, even if they themselves have not felt that exact same thing, they can know where I'm coming from. I don't feel like that three-eyed monster. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I'm never alone. So, like, what I also love is that you guys brought up was that you guys talked about how, like, the idea here is that young can also mean you still have room to grow. Every day is a growing experience as I work through Geeky Pause, I work through my program, always looking for that spiritual experience. The thing is that it doesn't have to be like this big, huge kumbaya burning bush moment every minute, every second of your life, because it's not that way for me. Okay. Like the idea is that it's about like practice, patience, it's not perfection, but I am looking to expand upon that, even if it's like the little thing, like the ability to like tell somebody like you've hurt my feelings, or hey, like this really didn't make me feel great, like can we discuss this, and be able to say, you know what, you're right, like I totally see where you're coming from, being able to work on that. Can you imagine drinking and like going to the bar and telling somebody that and like what their response would be? Like those aren't genuine conversations that you have. I can imagine the bartender being like, here's another shot. Like, please don't talk to me. I get to have like really expansive conversations with people today that leave me feeling filled. The people around me genuinely fill my cup up. I'm never without. And if there's any time that I need help, or that I'm struggling, there's always someone I can reach out to. I have a really awesome sponsor as well, and all my life, I really wanted a family of my own, and I finally got that. So, with that, thank you guys so much for allowing me to be here, and I'll give this back to you.